let's get straight into it. We'd love your thoughts on plans to let criminals serve their sentences at home. Of course, it's all in a bid to ease the pressure on prisons, which we know are so overcrowded. And earlier on the programme, Jeremy talked about the 1,000 criminals being given an early release today, this very day. And so this new idea would work alongside the early release scheme. It would mean that some criminals would be put under house arrest and monitored by GPS tags and smartphones and special watches to remind them to attend meetings with probation officers. They'd also be subject to a curfew. This kind of thing does already happen in some cases. It allows prisoners to be released 6 months early. So is it a good idea, or is it just giving them an easy ride? I'd love to hear from you on this one, but let's ask Andy first. It seems as if it's no punishment at all to be allowed to just live your life in your own home.
Comes down to the question, I think, Vanessa, of whether you see prison as revenge or rehab. For me, I see prison as an opportunity to rehabilitate people who have done wrong. Now, of course, if they've done something absolutely disgusting, if they're a threat to the public, they shouldn't be allowed out. But the best thing, the most positive thing we can do as a society is say, OK, you've clearly gone down a route here where you've committed a crime. What can we do to turn you into an upstanding citizen? In fact, they did something similar to this in Texas, and they found that reoffending rates halved, employment rates by ex-convicts increased by half, and the crime rate went down by 29%.
What, for staying at home?
They were able to close 16 jails.
Is that for staying at home, though?
Well, that was for good behaviour credits in jail. So they were able to say, you've behaved well, you behaved yourself in prison. We don't think you're a risk to the public. We know that you've done wrong, you've had your punishment, but now it's better for you to go back out into society and start contributing again.
Yes, but aren't you misleading everybody, Andy, when you say rehabilitation or revenge? It's not about seeking revenge on people who've done wrong and broken the law. It's about, isn't it, meting out a punishment, and one of the most kind of vivid and important punishments that we can inflict is depriving them of their liberty.
You
don't get, not really, it's not really.
Punishment in prison, that is another word for I want revenge on people who have done
It's
wrong.
not revenge, it's so that you feel the consequence of what
exactly.
you've done, isn't it? And Lin Mei, if they're in their own homes, you know, and they're allowed out all day, it's only a curfew between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m, so all day they can do exactly what they want to do, which you might say is commit the same crime that they were originally arrested and found guilty of.
We need to call this out. This is not some new, interesting rehabilitation sort of method. This is hugely reactionary because we don't have the prisons, we don't have the spaces. And I think it's incredibly embarrassing that Britain, you know, 5th or 6th wealthiest country in the world, doesn't have the infrastructure and the capabilities to build more prisons. If you have received a custodial sentence, already they have their sentence, you know, halved almost with various different crimes. And now we just saw, you know, a fine going out to Serco because they prematurely had to release these prisoners. They didn't have the capabilities to produce enough tags. And now they're discussing nudge technology. We're going to put these sort of new funky watches on them and hope for the best when they get nudged. Oh, no, you're not supposed to go too far away from your house. They're going to take them off. They're not going to be able to manage it properly. And as I said, we haven't had the time to look at this technology to see if it will work.
And Andy, what about the element of this, which is rehabilitation in jail? Of course, yes, very, very important. But also removing criminals from their environment. So they're not mixing with the same mates, they're not in the same place, they're not free to do what is customary and habitual for them to do, which is commit crime. They can't, they're in prison.
How can you rehabilitate at home as well? We're talking about, your thing is, if we're not, you don't agree with revenge.
The best place to rehabilitate at
in
home
the house.
with
Well,
your
no,
family.
because the only way you'd be rehabilitated is if you had a strong sense of planning when it comes to the probation service. Probationary service is at its brim. There's cuts everywhere. So how can you say, let's say, for example, I'm from a family with a sexual offender, and some of these are being released, or violent criminals. Me as a mother, I can't rehabilitate my criminal son.
I already said, and I think this is an important point, I already said that if someone is a threat to the public in any way at all, then they shouldn't be allowed.
But this is who we're releasing.
So I would agree with you on that, Lynn. I agree with you. I'm not talking about these people.
You're talking about semantics. Let's talk about this. When you say a threat to the public, yes, there are violent threats. Yes, there are sexually aggressive threats, of course. But what about, for example, exactly, the financial threat? So let's say you're a habitual shoplifter and chains unions, like the Co-op, are talking about the absolute plague of shoplifting, how much it's costing
Loss
the public
prevention,
ultimately.
yeah.
It's not a victimless crime. So let's imagine you're that kind of person. The threat that you're posing isn't violence necessarily, although you may be violent in the shop, but it's financial.
Two things. First of all, that is the kind of crime that you can rehabilitate for. Often that's linked to, for instance, drug addiction and drug abuse, as an example.
So how do you rehabilitate if you're in your own home?
I think this is important.
Let's
Talk about something that often isn't mentioned here, if I may, which is inherited criminality, which is my own phrase I just made up, which is where your dad was in prison, your grandfather was in prison, your older brother's in prison, and then you end up in prison.
You want those families to rehabilitate them?
By breaking up family units and keeping people in prison, it's proven sociologically. And I know you're already aghast at this, but it is proven sociological fact that keeping parents away from children does not improve family units or social cohesion.
The best way to rehabilitate these people is by being with their family. A family of crime.
Separating families does not, and
so
separating fathers from sons does not
inherited
make
criminality.
the society a
You're
safer
asking
place.
their inherited criminality, something you just made up.
I know it's counterintuitive.
For them to rehabilitate their criminal children.
The phrase I made up.
You know it doesn't make sense.
The criminologists would tell you exactly the same thing. Sociologically, it is
what if
not
they live
a good
alone?
thing for
How will they
society
be
to
rehabilitated
split
if
families
they live
up.
alone?
Let me ask you, though,
crimes.
about the signal that this gives out, because obviously one of the most important tenets of British justice is not just justice being done, but justice being seen to be done.
Yes.
Other people are meant to see it and realise if you steal, if you murder, if you're violent, if you attack, if you rob a dwelling house or a business, there will be consequences. Look at this person. That's why, of course, after the recent riots, people were sent to prison summarily, very, very, very fast and very, very prominently, so everyone could see, don't do this, don't join in a riot, because if you do, you'll end up banged up and you won't like it. It'll be horrible. You'll be embarrassed, humiliated, and all of that. If people are allowed to stay at home, Lin Mei, how will justice be seen to be done?
If I were a criminal right now, I'd be rubbing my hands. I'd be like, not even 40% of my sentence, and I get to put my feet up, have whatever food I like, feed off of the system because they won't be able to work. So you're going to have to deal with so many of those people at home, again on benefits, and essentially they're having a comfortable, free ride at home. If you were a criminal, why would you not commit crime in this era?
It's not a popular view, however, it is a true fact that no matter how draconian the punishments are, that doesn't stop people committing the crimes.
Let's have a word with Sonia. Sonia's on the line in Cheshire. Hi, Sonia. Thanks for ringing. Morning. What do you think about this? Criminals being punished by staying at home?
No, well, my opinion, Vanessa, on this is that it would be a lot more helpful if often people who commit crimes, when they're either with alcohol or with drugs. And my opinion is there's not enough done to help these people with rehabilitation, in residential rehabilitation, into drug and alcohol units.
So in other words, you're saying what they need is sort of specialist hospitalisation or specialist rehab that deals directly with the actual problem. That's the thing that's propelling them into crime. So not to be detained in prison, but also not to be detained at home either, really,
But even
Sonia.
in prison, the good thing about prison, Sonia, what do you think? Because if you are in prison, you do not get to access the drugs and the alcohol. But if you're at home, these people that you have said that have these addictions will be able to be at home and drink and take drugs, so they're not actually getting the help that they would in prison.
Oh, having known people who have been in prison, they actually do access drugs in prison, and
at the same rate as if they could, at home at the same rate.
Probably not, but it doesn't help them with the reason why they ended up in prison in the first place.
Sonia, thank you so much for calling. And actually, I think lots of people will think that Sonia's made an excellent suggestion. Target what happens. Don't just leave people floundering, either in prison or at home.
And also,
let's have a word with Anna. Anna's on the line in Cornwall. Thanks for ringing, Anna. Morning to you. What do you think about this one?
Oh, good morning. Yes, well, I feel that nothing being addressed really properly about rehabilitation of the young prisoners. Obviously, prisons don't do a job. They are not really providing training the young people need. What happens to army camps? Because I believe the army has been now dwindled by 50%. So surely there must be some army camps available. And why not to create kind of rehabilitation centers run by the army, where the prisoners, young men or women, could be offered proper training, become electricians, plumbers, bricklayers, whatever, but not putting them back into the society or to their home environment, where they probably, like the gentleman said, they are exposed to brothers, fathers, whatever, who didn't know any better life but crime life.
So, Anna, you're saying, so not prison, not rehabilitation, but almost kind of training centres, professional training centres, police still run by the army with professional trainers there saying, right, what do you want to be? Do you want to be an electrician? Let's show you how to do that. Painter and decorator, plasterer, plumber, let's learn that. And that way, by the time you finished here, you come out with something to equip you for an altogether different life. And you think that there are empty army bases that might be the right sort of place to house those. I wonder whether so many of them, certainly around where I live, have been turned into, as they always say, luxury flat developments. Because that's, I'm not kidding, that's what's happened to lots of RAF bases and everything around where I live. They're not available to put prisoners in. They've been turned into sort of money pits, really. I appreciate the call, Anna. Thank you so much. Let's have a word with Winston. Hi, Winston. Thanks for ringing.
Hello.
Hi. What would you suggest?
Well, I suggest if you're releasing someone from prison, the shoplifters should be released and the IDs should be put out of shops and stores, shame them, and then they won't do the crime. I believe sexual offenders and people like those dangerous fellows should be stayed in jail, and it's the government position to find a place to put them. They shouldn't be let out.
Yes. And the idea, though, that you serve your sentence in your own home, wherever you live, and you've got a tag on, you can't leave the house between 7 p.m. and 7, you don't fancy that?
Ridiculous.
Yes. And why do you say ridiculous, Winston? What don't you like about it?
Well, how many of these tags that they don't take off are when they're going out, and how much money do they do on these?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe it's safe.
So what would you do then, Winston, to ease the pressure on our prisons, which, as we know, are heavily overcrowded? As
I said, I would believe in release all the shoplifters that we have inside, because these are the people that you can put their photograph, etc., around the place where they're going shoplifting.
Yeah, unless they come in wearing a balaclava, a mask, a motorbike helmet.
You don't let them in. Yeah.
You don't let no one in with anything over their face.
Yeah.
Difficult though for the security
I would
guards,
release white-collared criminals, and I would put a mark on their bank accounts, because that's what would affect them. I don't think prison does much for white-collared criminals, to be honest.
I think Sonia was right in what she said about, to paraphrase, prisons being almost a college for criminals. It teaches criminals to be more criminal. And our other caller was Anna, said, you know, a sense of direction, a sense of purpose is what a lot of people are lacking who are in prison. And that's what I'm saying. Keeping them in prison is not making them less criminal or making any of us safer.
I would worry about those people who don't have a fixed abode, or
and we don't have the housing for them.
You know, all these people who you're not quite sure where they live, and they're not quite sure where they live, and they haven't got any real place that's their real home. Where are they meant to be between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m.?
And it usually is the petty criminals.
That's probably part of the reason why they ended up there in the first place. So actually we need to look at why have they not got somewhere to live, not let's keep them in prison forever.
But then you can't fast-track them in front of law-abiding citizens that have been waiting for housing for like over 10 years. It's unfair.
It's about focus. It's about a sense of place. For instance, Timpson's is a great example, isn't it?
Yeah,
he employs former criminals, and then there's rehabilitation through that. So we have in our own country a blisteringly good example of how this can work. Let's encourage more people to get involved in that kind of philanthropy.
Let's move on.